Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi everybody, and welcome to the show with yours truly, Stuart Andrew Alexander. And today, again, we have another fantastic guest who has a lot of great information to share with us. So without any further ado, let me just quickly introduce him, and then we'll have him on the interview to share some great information with us. Chris Wasden is a professor of innovation in the Entrepreneurship and Strategy Department at the University of Utah David Eccles School of Business. He also serves as the executive director of the Sorenson Center for Discovery and Innovation and the associated executive director of the Center for Medical Innovation. Chris's company, Sorenson Center for Discovery and Innovation, helps organizations that struggle to innovate technologies and business models and provides them the processes and methods that enable their employees to ride the innovation cycle along its entire life cycle. Chris's methodology, approach, tools, and framework are outlined in his new book, Tension: The Energy of Innovation, How Harnessing Tensions Fuel Your Creative Genius. And I'm sure we're going to hear something about that later on. But for now, let me introduce today's guest, Professor Chris Wasden. Welcome to the show, Chris. Are you there?
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent, Chris. So could you just share with us, where are you in the world right now?
I am in Utah on my way to Kansas City, where I also serve on an advisory position with the Oklahoma State University's Center for Healthcare Innovation.
Perfect. That sounds really interesting, Chris, and I'm sure our listeners are waiting to hear some great insights from you. So let's jump quickly in with the first question. I've already alluded a little bit to what it is that you do, but could you just describe in your own words the kind of clients that your business works with, and what is it that you do to help them?
Yeah, we work with an array of clients, all the way from young startup companies that are in their first year of operation to large global organizations. We have some global financial service clients. We have some global healthcare organizations and some global life insurance companies that we work with as well. Because all these organizations, regardless of whether they're small or large, struggle with the same issue around how to become more innovative.
This question of innovation, Chris, it's quite a broad term, but I'm sure because this is your area of expertise, could you just go into a little bit more detail into what innovation means for you, and specifically this question or the phrase of the innovation lifecycle? What does that actually mean?
Sure. We define innovation as value-creating novelty. So to be innovative, you have to be both new and have to create new sources of value. That's why oftentimes organizations might think of themselves as innovative, but really all they've done is improve something that's truly not innovative. And then within innovation, there are different classes of innovation. There are incremental innovations, breakthrough innovations, and radical innovations. And so when we think about this innovation life cycle, what we're doing is we're focused on identifying failure, because we see failure as the genesis of innovation, and then finding out those failures that create the most pain within an organization, within a system, because that pain is the emotional trigger that causes people to really want to do something different to change their life, their world, their experience. That pain then creates a tension. And that tension initially manifests itself as a maladaptive tension, which is a tension that causes this failure and pain to persist through time. And what you do as an innovator is you harness that maladaptive tension in such a way that you can transform it into an adaptive tension, that is a tension that enables you to do incremental innovations, or you can harness and transform it into a creative tension. And a creative tension are those tensions that are necessary for more radical and breakthrough innovations. And so what we do is we help these organizations understand how the innovation life cycle works from failure, pain, tension, innovation that eventually leads to growth, and then how to ride it along the entire life cycle from the discovery of the innovation to its incubation, its acceleration, that eventually takes you into a scaled growth opportunity that becomes the next big thing.
I'm curious, the four phases of the innovation life cycle. I mean, I had a chance to look at your bio before we came on air, and you have listed, and you just alluded a little to it, the four different stages, which were discovery, incubation, acceleration, and scaling. Could you possibly, for our listeners, just dig a little bit deeper into each one of those stages of the life cycle and just give us an example, a real quick, simple example of how they would translate to our listeners out there in their own personal situations?
Sure. The most powerful tension in every organization is the tension between running the business of today and creating the business of tomorrow. The problem is that the business of tomorrow, through an innovative process, doesn't generate cash today. And so organizations are always biased towards running the business of today, and they consider the creation of the business of tomorrow as a luxury that they'll do when they have some spare money, they have some spare time or resources. The reality is that organizations that approach that tension that way actually never create the business of tomorrow and tend to fail, which is why you see the average life of a Fortune 500 company is measured in years, not decades, which is different than it used to be 50 years ago. So what we do is we help organizations realize that they need to have an active effort. They need to have the structures and practices within their organization to continually discover new opportunities. That means that they're looking for new sources of failure and pain in the marketplace that are creating tensions for existing customers. And then they bring those tensions into their organization to continue to discover and to identify opportunities that could be the opportunities. So that discovery phase of the innovation cycle is very important in order to enable all of their employees to take their daily experience and translate it into identifying failure and pain and tension that they could then turn into an innovation. Now, the reality is that for every 1,000 ideas that we discover in this first phase of the innovation life cycle, probably only 10 are good enough to explore in greater detail and then move forward in the next phase of the life cycle, which is incubation.
Okay.
And in incubation, what we're trying to do there is eliminate technical risk. So in discovery, we came up with some ideas, a very few of which we thought were worthy of exploring further. And so we identified and eliminated what we would call feasibility risk in discovery. But in incubation, we're eliminating technical risk. We're proving whether or not what we discovered can be made. Will it function? So through incubation, as we create prototypes and we do pilot testing, we eliminate that technical risk. And once the technical risk is gone, then the question becomes, will someone buy it? And if so, in what sort of business model, what sort of revenue model, what sort of margins can we earn? And invariably, every technology, every business opportunity that's incubated, when we take it into that next phase of the innovation life cycle, which is acceleration, we don't come to market with the ideal business model. And so what we end up doing is iteratively improving the business model through acceleration to come up with a business model that we think we can lock on so we can actually scale the business. And so the primary risk that we're dealing with in acceleration is business model risk. And we iteratively improve the business model until we get to that ideal business model. And then in the scaling phase of the innovation life cycle now, we have a product that technically works, It has a business model that works. And now the question is, can we make it big? And so there you put in place the lean processes that we oftentimes think about with regards to Six Sigma optimization, because what we're focused on now is eliminating failure, and we're focused on greater efficiency and operational improvements.
Well, I mean, that's some really specific insights there, Chris, and I'm sure that our listeners are really going to appreciate you going into so much detail. It's obvious just by listening to you that you've got some experience. You've spent quite a lot of time looking into the topic of innovation. So the next question that I have for you, Chris, is what is it that actually led you to this field? When did you catch the innovation bug, so to speak? If you'd just like to share that with our listeners, I'm sure they would appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, I grew up in a family that always liked to be experimenting and doing new things, but I never really thought of myself as an inventor at a young age, just more of an explorer. Then I got a degree in accounting, which is kind of a boring degree, right? You wouldn't think of an accountant as an inventor. I went to Wall Street and was an investment banker, and some people might think maybe investment bankers are too creative. But I did that for a while, but still had this nagging desire to really invent and create. And so my wife and I decided that we would start a new business in our town, which was a retail kosher bakery. Neither she nor I bake. Neither she nor I are Jewish. But we saw a market opportunity because our town needed this sort of a business. Our town was predominantly Jewish. And so we worked with our landlord who is Jewish, our supplier who is Jewish, our vendor who is Jewish, and they helped us find the rabbi who would help us become kosher certified. And we started this business. And it was very, very successful. And then after that, that gave us a lot of confidence that we could do some very new, out-of-the-box things, even though we may not have all the capabilities that are necessary. But we did have the desire, we had the vision, we had some capabilities that could move us forward. And so then a few years later, I ended up meeting a doctor who told me about some of the problems that he was having trying to be an entrepreneur and an innovator in a certain area of medicine that he practiced. And I gave him some ideas and some suggestions about how he could improve that. And long story short, we decided to partner together, and we invented a brand new diagnostic technology in the medical field, got 11 patents on it, raised $4 million of venture funding, and started it as a business. And within 5 years, we had gone from 0 to 10 million in revenues, and we sold it to a larger medical device company. So that gave me a lot of confidence that, even though I didn't have a medical background, even though I wasn't an engineer, I could actually invent and patent technologies and get other engineers to work for me through that process. And after that experience, I wasn't ready to get a real job that is a boring job, 9 to 5 sort of thing. So I got some of the investors that had backed me in my previous company, and we together created a medical technology incubator. And with that incubator, what we did is we spent a year trying to discover different technologies that we thought were worthy of creating a company around. And we identified one that we licensed from the University of Alabama, that we licensed from the University of Texas. We raised a few $1 million of venture financing for those and launched those as companies. And there, again, we had to take an initial raw technology and add additional patents to develop the technology further. And then I hired a team of people and moved those companies forward. So, I would in many ways argue that I was perhaps one of the more unlikely innovators out there, but because I had this nagging desire to be creative and to be a contributor to changing markets and changing the world, as Steve Jobs would say, putting a dent in the universe, I was able to align myself with other people who also wanted to be creative, and we together were able to invent and develop new technologies, new companies that have gone on to be very successful.
Okay, I mean, again, listening to you, Chris, it's quite obvious to myself and obviously to the listeners that you are an expert in what you do, and you're definitely out there making a dent in the universe, as you said, Steve Jobs used to say. Now, you alluded to it before that you help organizations in the innovation lifecycle. You talked about discovery, the incubation phase, the acceleration and scaling. But what is it that stops most of these organizations from actually innovating technologies and the business models that you provide? Or what's the most common obstacle that you hear out there?
I would say there's two primary obstacles. One obstacle is that, again, this initial tension I mentioned between running the business of today and creating the business of tomorrow. The structures and practices that we use in running the business of today are created in this Lean Six Sigma model design to eliminate failure. And yet, I mentioned earlier that failure is the genesis of innovation. So what happens is that an organization that is in a scaling mode is actually designed to kill all innovation, because innovation arises from and improves through failure, yet a scaled business model is designed to eliminate failure. In fact, Lean Six Sigma says that I will only have 3 failures in 1 million attempts. Yet to innovate in this discovery phase of the innovation lifecycle, I mentioned earlier, you'd have 1,000 ideas and only 10 would be worth even incubating. So look at the level of failure you have to experience in discovery versus the level of failure that you have to have in scaling. So organizations that are scaled organizations generally want to apply the same discipline to innovation that they apply to their scaled opportunities. But that structure and practice of scaling will kill innovation. So that's kind of the first problem. They don't understand that there's different phases of the innovation life cycle. They don't understand that every phase requires a different structure and a different practice in order to operate in that phase. The second problem I have seen very common is that they will realize that you can't have the same structure and practice for innovation as scaling, okay? And so what they'll do is they'll develop a discovery capability. And so they'll have some sort of an effort within their organization to brainstorm and identify new business opportunities. And then as they develop those, then what happens is they say, well, this is a cool idea. Let's apply it to our business. And then what happens is they go to the scaled part of their business and say, hey, we just discovered this really cool thing that we could do in our company. You guys should incorporate it into the core business. And the core business will then say, well, I can't do that. You've never proven that it can actually technically work and has a business model that will actually make us any money. And so there's this huge gap between discovery and scaling. And because there's this huge gap, they can't jump from discovery to scaling. They've got to have these interim phases to de-risk the technology and to de-risk the business model. And they don't realize that. And so these organizations, while they might have a very good and robust discovery capability, they don't have an incubation and an acceleration capability, which means that none of the good ideas can make it from discovery to scaling.
Okay, Chris, one of the questions that I have for you, and it's something that I've done my experience as a talk show host, is listeners always thrive on examples of how our guests have helped people in similar situations. How have they helped them to overcome the obstacles that they are facing themselves, whether that's on a personal level, whether it's an organization, whether it's an entrepreneur? Can you share with us one or two examples of how you have actually specifically helped somebody or an organization out there to overcome some of the struggles that we've been addressing today in relation to innovation, discovery, incubation, acceleration, and scaling?
Sure. And those two examples I just gave actually came from two real companies. So one of them was one of the largest global financial organizations in the world that had this great discovery capability. They had their own discovery team that would actually go around working with their clients all over the world to come up with good ideas. And yet, over a 2-year period, not one of their ideas were accepted by their larger scaled part of their business. And so they came to me and said, Chris, we can't get these guys into our organizations to accept any of our great ideas. And so I identified for them that they're missing the two interim phases of the innovation lifecycle. And if they would create those, then they could move innovations along the lifecycle to eventually get them to scaling. The second example that I gave earlier was with the largest life insurance company in the world. And they had innovation as one of their 5 core values of their organization, yet neither their employees nor their customers, based upon employee surveys and customer surveys, believed the company was innovative at all. And so the CEO was concerned that innovation was actually a bit of a fraud within the company, that they had it as a core value, yet no one inside or outside the organization believed that they practiced that value. And so they came to me and said, Chris, we've got to start somewhere, and we are clearly a lean Six Sigma scaling type organization. How do we start the first phase of the innovation lifecycle and create a discovery capability? And so what we did is we looked at other marketplace, we looked at other best practices. We identified for them the best practices and operate a discovery capability within their organization. And then we worked with them to implement that over the course of a year so that they then now are regularly creating lots of good ideas. And then after that, we then help them develop the incubation capabilities and then move things forward within their business. One last example I would give is regards smaller companies. Right, so I just talked about 2 of the largest financial service and life insurance companies in the world, but we've also done this for smaller companies that also struggle. Their struggles tend to be less around the innovation lifecycle and more around how do we actually apply new technologies like digital technologies, social, mobile, analytic, and cloud to existing business models and value propositions to transform them to change customer experience. And so there we'll use a combination of workshops and other sorts of consulting tools with their organization to come up with new innovations that we can then take through a rapid prototyping experience so that we can actually test very quickly within a 90-day time frame. Each, we call them MVPs, minimum viable products, each MVP to test it and de-risk it and then move it forward to the next phase of development.
Okay, Chris, thanks for that answer. That was fantastic. A lot of great information. Just got a couple more questions before we go. So what would be your very best piece of advice? I mean, I know you've shared some fantastic advice so far, but what would be your ultimate best piece of advice for someone who is considering using the 4 phases of your innovation life cycle, the discovery, the incubation, the acceleration and scaling? What would be your insider tip that you could share with the listeners today?
It comes back to the title of my book, Tension. If you were to survey people within any organization about the word tension and whether or not tension is something that they like, they enjoy, that they promote, that they want to experience, the answer is generally no. Right? We tend to think of tension as a bad thing. It's a thing that might create pressure or stress in our life. Yet if you ask those same people, can you see a world without tension? The answer is no. And you ask them another question, which is, do you use tension in your life and your relationships with other people to get things done? The answer is yes. And so the reality is that tension is something that we love to hate, but we realize we can't live without. And the problem with tension is that most leaders in most organizations don't realize how to harness that tension effectively to get the most out of their people, because they tend to focus more on the maladaptive or negative aspects of tension rather than positive aspects of tension. And so a lot of what I do is really help leaders realize that innovation isn't just going to happen by mistake. We think of innovation as being serendipitous and whatnot, but the most innovative people, while there's serendipity that helps drive the innovation process forward, you can actually harness that and you can create serendipity and increase your probability of success by understanding how to harness tension and that tension relationship within your organization, among your people, with your suppliers, your customers. And that's really what I focus on, is creating this positive tension which is the energy of innovation.
Chris, you mentioned your book. Is that book out now, or is it due to come out? How can people actually get hold of that book?
Right, so we're going to actually have a Kickstarter campaign for the book starting in the middle of September, and then it will be available on Amazon in October. But right now we have a book website at www.tensioninnovation.com. And there I also have blog postings and more updates about the innovation lifecycle, as well as some videos that we've launched that describe the innovation lifecycle and how it works.
Okay, great. And in addition to your book, if there's anybody out there that's been listening today and they want to find out more about what it is that you can do and how you can help them, how can they connect with you?
Right, so they can go to the book website, or they can go to my Innovation Center website, which is www.digitalsandboxu.com. And there we describe the services that we provide to companies, to students, to academia, to help all of those types of people and organizations move along the innovation lifecycle.
Perfect. All of your contact details are there, email, telephone number?
Yeah, so, email, telephone number, all are there. My email address is chris.wasden@eccles.utah.edu.
Perfect. Well, Chris, we come to the end of today's show. I really want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy day. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners before we leave?
I think my final thought, and this is the promise of my book, we are all creative geniuses. We're all born to be creative geniuses. We all have this innate desire to be creative geniuses. The problem is that school and jobs have taken it away from us because we've been forced into these kind of lean, scaled sort of opportunities. And my promise is that if we can, within organizations in our lives, put in place the right structures and practices, we can regain that creative genius and become the sort of creative person that we really innately want to become. And we just have to understand how the innovation cycle works and the innovation life cycle works and apply that in our lives, and it will actually make us happier.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You have heard from today's guest, Professor Chris Wasden of the Sorenson Center for Discovery and Innovation. He certainly is an innovation expert. I will ensure that all of his contact details are on the website below the interview. Chris, I just want to say a huge thank you once again for taking the time out today, and I'm sure that our listeners are going to get a lot of value from this interview, and I wish you all the best, and we'll talk very, very soon. So once again, this was Stuart Andrew Alexander saying goodbye, take care, and we'll talk very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.